I'm a longtime viewer, first-time caller. I check you guys out on YouTube mainly, and been watching you live here and there, and have been wanting to get a chance to call in. I grew up mainly as I don't know if we were atheist, but we didn't go to church much. My grandmother was Baptist, and I guess we went to Sunday school a little bit here and there, but pretty much not involved with religion too much. When I was a teenager, my mom and I looked into paranormal type things, went to the Church of Religious Science, which is actually has nothing to do with Scientology. I don't know if people know it.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it, so I have no preconceived concepts.
Yeah, it's sort of encompasses all religions, and
so you have kind of a diverse background.
Yeah, and so there was when it got read by a psychic, and we heard things about how there's different religious guides in different parts of your body and this kind of thing, and so whether I believed it all, I'm not sure exactly, but I had nothing disproving it, so I sort of took it for what it was worth, and then when I was around 28, I had an interesting experience that sort of went along with a manic episode.
Oh, okay.
If I can say that, but
yeah, you can. Can I before you go on? Was this the first time you experienced a manic episode?
Kind of, yeah.
Because that's pretty rare to get hit with that, as a one-off when you're almost 30.
Yeah, and the one after that wasn't until 10 years later, so that's
okay.
That was also
Do you? I mean, I don't want to get to. You don't have to get into detail or anything, but do you think that there might have been like a life situation that maybe triggered this? Like, could there have been a particular stress or something that happened? Because it's really odd for that to just happen.
Yeah, I mean, it had a little bit to do with meeting a particular person who.
Okay. All right. So there were some things going on. Okay.
Yeah, and they always seem to go with having luck with meeting women too here and there.
Okay.
And so there are various triggers. I've looked at them through the years.
Okay.
Hopefully, I'm done with them now because a lot of bad things have happened.
Okay. I just wanted to look at that a little bit before you got into it because you were tying this in with something else that occurred concurrently, right?
Yeah, or just sort of my general outlook. I mean, at that time, I read this book, Metaphysical book, which, I mean, that was actually one of the triggers, kind of. And it was one of these, what do you call it, when it's being read in the first person, channeled type books, and from an angel type being.
Okay, so somebody was writing the book on behalf of some sort of divine agent.
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
I gotcha.
And it's called Starseed Transmissions. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
Okay, no, but it sounds like Carey. I would expect. Okay.
Yeah, Ken Carey is the author. Anyway,
okay.
His stuff, I don't know, I love his stuff, actually.
Okay.
But what that talked about is mankind sort of being a conduit between the spiritual aspect, of course, the one you can't see, which I know you guys talk about a lot, and that's one of the things you argue against, and then physical aspect, which is the world and rocks and mankind and the rest of it. And there's various reasons why that kind of makes sense to me, and so I've. Like I say, it also, this little book, it sort of fit in a way with all religions, sort of explained the whole thing. It was like a 80-page book. So that part was interesting to me, too.
Okay.
So anyway, what I have ended up calling myself, I kind of did some notes before I called here.
Okay, good.
I'm calling myself a metaphysical agnostic.
Okay.
Because...
they put you down as a theist. Shame on the control room.
So, yeah.
I guess we don't have a code for metaphysical agnostic.
Well, what I did say that there appears to be a divine plan behind things going on, and
what makes you think that?
Various things. Let's see. As I was listening to the other guys,
what is the plan? Where are we going with this? Like ultimately, what is the plan here that we need to know about?
The plan would be for the world to turn into a better place, something towards what you might see in a Star Trek world.
I'm for that.
You know.
Well, I'm for that too, but I'm not sure observing the world that I'm seeing that plan really working.
Oh yeah, I mean things are rough. I agree with that.
So where is it? If I look at the world, I see it. I see this plan happening. I see the divine work that is creating this plan in the White House, or where is this manifesting the better world?
Well, let's see. I sort of thought about that a little bit.
Because we got a lot of issues with ISIS going on. We have, now don't get me wrong. I'm not going to be the world is about to end person, right? Because we'll get theists that call, and I don't want to sound like I'm flip-flopping here, where somebody calls and says the world is so horrible, and I say, well, we've really cut down on slavery. We've really cut down on, like women have a better place in many areas, and so I do agree that there are areas where you can point to it and say, hey, there are things that have improved. But what I guess I'm wondering is if that is sufficient to say, clearly this is the work of a divine engineering, as opposed to people.
You're absolutely right. I mean, if you're going to look at things at face value, and especially how things have developed in the last 10 years, it looks like we're going to hell pretty quickly, and or something to that effect. And
comrade.
And yeah, talking about ISIS, and I don't know. I mean, I've been called a conspiracy theorist here and there. The chemtrails and who knows.
Can I ask you something real quick? You sound like somebody you read a lot, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of it has been online recently.
That's still. I'm gonna let you have that. I mean, I have people that read ebooks and stuff. I mean, paper's not what it used to be. So, have you ever read any Joseph Campbell?
I'm aware of him, and
Okay.
I've also I mainly see some of his TV programs, but yeah, I think he's pretty cool character.
Did you see the interviews with Bill Moyers? Is it Bill Moyers? Did he do?
Bill Maher is one of my favorites. Yes.
Bill Moyers, and it was like I think a several-part series, but I hope I don't have the wrong interviewer. But he did a really great, several episode thing with it. It was really awesome. But Joseph Campbell and also Carl Jung, the psychologist from way back, both talk a lot about concepts of dualism, which it sounds like that's where your interest lies, right? You seem really interested in this sort of dualism, like the spiritual and the physical, the metaphysical and the physical.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it goes across all aspects of being. I mean, there is evil and good and all that kind of thing.
Well, Jung was interested in, and he had some interesting beliefs of his own, and he was kind of interested in what it was about the mind that might contribute to the human experience that would make people view their existence in a dualistic fashion. Like, what was it about the way the mind worked that would create a dualist perspective in a brain? And it's kind of too bad that he lived before current neuroscience, because he had to work very much from just sort of observing behaviors and talking to people and asking about dreams and kind of getting this idea of what is conscious, what is non-conscious. And that's very difficult when you can't put an electrode on someone's head and really brain map that person. So he was working off of a lot of intuition based on observation, but it was still kind of interesting, some of the things he came up with about how minds work, conscious and non-conscious thinking. Well, conscious thinking and non-conscious aspects of of thought or brain. You know, like the idea of dreaming, for example, like you're not conscious, but you're aware of a story that's happening, right, and you're participating in it, and yet you're not conscious, but you're aware. And so there's all these levels kind of consciousness that in some cultures, they consider those dreams to be divine themselves, right? Like they consider that part of dualism, right, that it's an interaction with the divine because you're not conscious and yet you're experiencing and seeing and doing. And so there are parts of the brain and things that the brain can do that give us this idea, this experience, really. It's an experience of duality, whether or not it's actually what we define it as, it's how we feel. So we have now science that shows that impulses in the brain to act happen before the actions are conscious. So our brain is triggering behavior, and then we become consciously aware of the thought of, I'm going to do this. So you can't see Eric on the other side of the screen, but he just took a drink. And according to this research, the impulse to take that drink would have happened to Eric before Eric had the thought, I'm going to take a drink, right? So your brain is operating in a non-conscious mode, and then it's sort of relaying those things to your conscious brain. But since you are pretty much defining yourself as your conscious mind, you have these impulses coming to you from where, right? And so this can make people feel like, I'm getting these feelings and I'm getting these impulses, and where do they arise? Like, where are they coming from? Well, they come from your brain, but you're not aware of it because they're not coming from conscious parts of your brain. And by the time your conscious brain becomes aware of it, that thing is already hit, and it seems like you thought of it, but you didn't.
So it starts in the subconscious, is what
yeah. And so the other thing, though, what I think you might like about Campbell, so Joseph Campbell goes into the whole mythology of what you're talking about. So he looks at cultural myths and how they play into this idea of dualism, the idea of how we look at ourselves as both physical and non-physical, especially when you go back again before neuroscience. You have people who are working on just feeling and experience and observation, and they have this feeling of there's something else in my head that is going on when I'm dreaming, is going on before I'm having an impulse, is, you know, I have these weird thoughts sometimes, I don't know where they come from, and I take these drugs and I have these bizarre experiences. And so all of these cultures have these different levels of consciousness that they are interpreting in different ways. And so you get these divine explanations of origins for these things or mythological stories about them. And I think that what you're describing is, there's a saying from Campbell, and I think this is pretty close to the quote, is something like, all religions are true, but none are literal. And I think people run into problems when, definitely. Right, so when they start to say this God or this hero or this angel or these things are literal, that's when they start missing the message, which is usually a kind of deeper message about the human experience, right? I would recommend, I think, if you're going into like metaphysics and doing this reading in metaphysics and people channeling and stuff like this, where they're kind of presenting almost the literal of it, you sound like the type of person who can sort of look past the literal, because you keep saying things like, and I don't know if I really believe it, but whatever, I don't think. So I think you're not looking so much at the literal aspect of, oh, that is so cool that this angel wrote a book through this woman, as opposed to whatever she's saying about the human experience. And if you're
there was one thing.
Yeah, go.
There was one thing. Excuse me, Tracie.
No, please.
That was coming up, and then I made notes about. And when you're talking about subconscious and so on, I was thinking about, okay, how can mankind actually be this conduit between the spiritual and the physical? Well, okay, you look at what's going on. Animals and the rest, you know, all the animals in the world, they sort of act on instinct, and they're in touch with sort of the subconscious, but not necessarily aware of it directly, you know, whereas man is more, you know, we obviously can deal with matter, and transform matter into what we want, and that kind of thing, and are developing through advancements in technology more and more, being able to develop things and so on, and but we've lost some contact with the subconscious and our actual, what am I saying? The way animals are naturally. Oh God, I'm missing words.
Can I try and help?
Instinctual. We don't have.
I mean, we do. I think that people operate more on instinct than they're aware of, and I think that we are finding more and more that the conscious mind may not be the driver's seat that we think it is.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of wondering if and this may be what you're saying, and it may not, you can correct me, but for me it almost seems like sometimes we sort of overthink the part that our conscious mind plays. We tend to give it more authority than it actually exercises in observed reality. We attribute more to it than maybe it is actually causing.
What's actually happening in real life?
Yeah, I think our experience of being conscious may be creating the illusion in most of us or all of us that consciousness is kind of driving, and from an evidence standpoint, my understanding is that that's not necessarily what's happening in our heads in reality.
Mm-hmm.
We might be overanalyzing our experience as animals.
Yeah, I mean, to be truthful, I haven't always, or lately, I don't think too much about this being the conduit between spirituality and so on, and it's not something I necessarily practice. I will meditate,
Yeah.
and I believe, yes, there's probably aliens, or who knows where they came from. Maybe they came through time portal or something like that.
Yeah.
There's angels here and there, and I've had experiences. One of the things is when I'm on a manic trip, there's what I've sort of termed as an accelerated synchronicity. Other people seem to be feeling the same thing. And
I have had that experience on drugs as well, but when I'm on drugs, I'm not sure that experience, you know what I mean? That's another thing where it's like, I'm not sure I can trust my conscious recollection or experience at that point. Right. I mean,
and overall, when you talk about evidence of something like a divine plan, one of the keys has been rock and roll and the Beatles and other groups and how they sing about such things.
All right.
About how we're all going to be in a.
I guess what I would say is I would appeal to people before they go literal with some of these things to consider that maybe they're taking a metaphor too far. That would be my, what do you call it, my one recommendation, or if I had to offer a suggestion, that would be it. It's like there are interesting aspects to what they speak about in a symbolic way, but when we start to take them literally, it's almost like when people get angry if someone burns a flag without seeing the irony that the flag represents the freedom to burn the flag, right? So they get more hung up on the symbol as a literal thing, you burned the flag, than they do the idea of the freedom that it represents. And so I think it's important that we try to not get too literal with some of these symbols.
Right, and I wouldn't call myself a literalist, and certainly not that. And let's see. I had a couple of stupid questions here, which I'll just throw out at you to sort of try to round it up here.
Yeah, because we are running out of time here, and I've got a few more callers.
Yeah. Let's see. Is it you guys' intention to recruit people into atheism?
Into a what?
Is it you guys' intention to recruit people into atheism?
I wouldn't categorize what I do that way. I think for me, it's about asking people to consider their perspectives and to ultimately become the driver in their life, right? So I want people to get their lives, to control their lives. And whatever that means to them, they may go their whole lives and never become an atheist, but I would at least, if I could get them to start thinking or questioning or examining that. To me, the idea that if they, for example, rejected a God, but they did it for really horrible reasons, I wouldn't consider that, like a win. That to me would be a fail. Does that make sense? So it's not, yes, I think that the ultimate outcome would be atheism if you were following the paths of the most reasonable thinking. That's my perspective. Obviously, there's people who disagree. But my goal wouldn't be, if I had a magic wand and I could just, you're all going to be atheists now, that would kind of defeat the purpose of wanting them to reason for themselves.
Right. Okay, yeah, I know you've answered the question before, and I was just sort of throwing that one out there. The other part is, I'm not so sure. I guess in some ways you might be able to call me an atheist, but would you think that modifying my agnostic point of view towards one that were like atheism would be worthwhile? Not necessarily like I'd want to do it.
Well, I'm not sure what your agnostic perspective is.
Yeah, those aren't mutually exclusive.
There are people who identify as agnostic atheists.
Yeah.
And so it may be that you
Yeah.
could say, I really don't know the answers to these questions. I don't believe a God exists, but if one is presented to me, I will accept it as real. Most atheists would identify that way.
Okay, well, that's cool. Just real quick here.
It's super cool.
All
right, last
I
one.
watch you guys all the time. I watch you guys all the time, and I know that, I agree with you that, the Bible has all kinds of bad stuff in it, and people that follow that and so on need to be kind of aware of that. But it seems like a lot of times you'll come up with arguments with Christians, and same points are recycled again and again and again. And it'd be nice to hear more stuff about speaking with maybe Buddhists or Hindus.
We'll take anybody that calls. If you have friends that are Buddhists and you'd like to suggest that they call in, please feel free. We pretty much talk to people, anyone who calls.
And lastly, your caller before last, God bless Paul. The poor kid was having issues.
All right. Well, we're going to put you on hold, not hang up, because I have gotten the answer on the hold thing, and they said some of these calls I need to put on hold. So I'm putting you on hold. We're done talking to you, but the call screener may want to talk to you a little bit. Okay?
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Chris.
Great to talk to you finally, Tracie. I'm definitely a fan.
Bye-bye.
And good to meet you again.
Take care, Chris.
Okay. You're going to have to jump in because I'm talking too much.
Well, then I'll jump in really quick.
Okay.
I have a different view. I don't think we're trying to convert people to atheism, right?
Okay.
Because I don't think that really has a lot of structure to it. There are a whole bunch of atheists that I have everything else not in common with, that we just would not get along.
Sure.
But what I would say is that the more we can shrink the influence of religion, the more we can remove an edifice that a lot of wrongs are committed under. And so I think one more place that we can take away pedophiles who get shipped off to places and avoid extradition, people who prey on the weak and the elderly for money, people on fixed incomes, and extort others that way. Mm-hmm. I think that if we can do that, like if we can just help bring that down just a little bit, and help inform people just a little bit more, I think that I would be.
Let me just ask though, would you say that, for example, if I were able to, there's a person who's, I love my church, I love my God, I love my pastor, I love my family, we all go to church all the time, we're at the bake sale and we're at the, whatever. If we can get that person to begin to look at pieces of their life as things that they maybe should start driving. Like, well, why do you accept this? Why, you know what I mean? Like, and get them to start thinking about that. wouldn't that person, as they begin to gain more control over their life, then other influences that are controlling their life would start to wane, right? I mean, it's like an economic pie. I can't start taking back pieces of my life and taking control of it and still have somebody else controlling it. I'm taking that control back from somewhere. And so when that comes back, when that pastor is caught doing something wrong, at the youth group or whatever, that person would be more likely to say, wait a minute, I'm not going to automatically support the pastor, than somebody who is just whole hog into, buying into it lock, stock, and barrel.
Hopefully.
I mean, that's...
I want to contribute to that.
Right.
I take a look at, like Paul, for example, right? I mean, he talks about lukewarm, but when I was a Christian, I was on fire.
Oh, yeah, me too.
And I mean, I was in it.
Yeah.
And the culture around that was staying away from secular things. It was staying out of the influence of God. It was shame. Oh my gosh, shame. He was talking about 12 years old getting into the church. But when I was 12 in the church, all of the boys were starting to go through puberty, and they were really shamed about what was going on in their pants.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
And I mean, that was a way to just double down and sink in. And so I agree that exposing them is one thing, but I also just want to tack that on. I don't think it's against what you said. I think that just tacks on nicely. The more we expose them.
That's what I was saying. I think that those things just follow along. And just to note, shame, I want to just talk about shame for just a moment. Shame versus guilt. Shame is an emotion that you attach to yourself. When a person feels shame, they feel shamed of themselves, not of what they've done. And they will try to hide, right? So when you're ashamed, you try to hide yourself, hide things you do. When you feel guilty, you feel like this is eating away at me and I need to tell someone what I've done. So guilt is more about a desire to expose it and not hide it, right? It drives that sort of, I have to tell. Whereas shame is more about, I'm just going to keep hiding it. And shame gets very toxic because when you start hiding something that you think is a problem, or that is a problem, it may or may not be. You can be ashamed of things that really aren't a problem. But if you're ashamed of a thing, you won't talk about it. You won't go get help. You won't, you won't get support because you're busy trying to pretend that it's not happening and convince everybody else that it's not happening. It reminds me of a story I remember about a young woman that had an eating disorder. And she was very ashamed of it, and she was an exchange student staying with somebody that I knew. And when they would have dinners, she would barely eat. And they would say, you hardly eat. Like, are you sure you're not hungry? Are you sure you don't want any more? No. Well, one evening when this young woman was clearing the plates, as she did as a regular thing, the host mom went into the kitchen and saw her just gorging on the leftovers, like just gorging. And when she saw that somebody saw her in this situation, she was horrified and ashamed. And the host mom was like, you don't have to feel bad. You're allowed to eat as much as you like. But that's the thing. It was about her internalized shame. It didn't matter that the people around her didn't care how much she ate. Like, eat as much as you like. We don't get, nobody's going to judge you for it. But she's judging herself, right? For whatever reason, she's ashamed of this disorder and that she was caught in this. And it just, obviously made her feel horrible. And this is the thing. It's like you can't get help when you're hiding it. And this is part of what makes shame so toxic, is that it's just going to destroy a person and they're going to be hidden away somewhere, being destroyed. So shame is really bad. And if you think you're experiencing it or feeling it, try to find a space where you can understand that you're not bad. You're not a bad person. Whatever it is that you think you did or you think is wrong with you, it doesn't get better by hiding it, And there's some things that are so hard to come out with, some things that society does judge, that if a person were to come out, they would be hit with horrible judgments and treated horribly. And I think that we have to kind of check that, because there's some things, if we think they're that bad, maybe we need to start behaving in a way that allows the people who suffer with that to come forward instead of having to hide, right? I mean...
You know, I think the Facebook group for the Atheist Experience is going to be talking about our cultural taboos that we don't talk about for a while. I think that's a really great topic.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, if a child is having impulses that they know are not going to be acceptable, and they're not going to come forward, and if they do come forward, they're going to be treated horribly for coming forward, we're kind of creating monsters.
Yeah,
so we need to not be doing that.